Thursday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, episode 59 of Politically Conscious takes place. MAGA loves the Second Amendment until ICE pulls the trigger. After the shooting of Alex Petti, the tune suddenly changes. The black community isn't shocked though. History already showed us who the Second Amendment protects and who it doesn't. Trump's immigration policies once fueled his rise, now they may be his political downfall. If you're tired of the propaganda, listen to us. What's up, everybody? It's your mental activist, Montoya Smith, bringing you episode 59 of the Politically Conscious Show. Got my brother Emil Bryant riding with us. If you've watched us before, we typically try to have three of us. Unfortunately, our brother Shelly Winters had to go to a business meeting this morning, and so we were coming in this thing one-winged, if you will. I'm in the middle. I got my brother Emil Bryant on the right. on the left. And then our right wing is missing today, if that makes sense, because we try to do a show where we give it to you from all angles. There's a lot going on. We missed last week, so we're black at you, as I like to say, again this week. So, Emil, thank you for being with us. Tell them about your political background, because I typically have two political experts. I'm not an expert. I'm a good moderator, so I usually try to moderate between the two of you, and I also offer my 3 cents from time to time. But you are the expert on this show, and we're going to get into what's happening around the country. But if you will, tell them what you do real quick, and we're going to do what we always do: play cuts and react to those political cuts in reference to what's happening right now in politics. Tell them who you are, Emil.
First of all, I want to say thank you, Montoya. I am Emil Bryant. I am a political consultant, author, speaker, and today I am going to try to fly as level and straight as possible while we do this work. But behind me is a picture of the Deacons of Defense from Bogalusa, Louisiana, in 1964, and I thought it was appropriate for what's going on today so that we don't forget that the Second Amendment is a universal, applicable law that applies to every citizen in America, and according to the Supreme Court, non-citizens. So let's be sure we go back to our history and remember the truth about our nation.
So when you say the truth, then I don't quite understand or know why you suggest universal universal applies. We're gonna get into that. Matter of fact, the first cut that we're gonna play, unfortunately, with these ICE shootings, it has brought things in the arms between, hey, where's MAGA on the Second Amendment right? Don't tread on me. These things that they've always talked about, they seem to be a little quiet right now, unfortunately, after the shooting of Alex Petti. And we got Jolly Ginger, who was actually on, I'm sorry, I can't say, I'll show you the clip. But basically, Jolly Ginger. So for those who are watching, there will be some. He's always cursing, so just be prepared. There are some cursing f-bombs, I think, coming from this guy. If you're familiar with Jolly Ginger, but we're gonna play this cut, and we'll come back and give y'all a response. If y'all get in the comments, we'll respond in the comments as well.
Can I make some people uncomfortable real quick, Don? Are you cool with that?
Come on, Jolly, it's me.
Come on. Okay, let's talk about gun control in this country. All right, and what it's always been about. All right, Let's recap a situation that we're all aware of. He had a legal gun permit, okay? He was approached first by law enforcement. Law enforcement were given commands. He wasn't resisting those commands, but then he was shot and killed. Everybody knows what I'm talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Alex Petti?
Mm-hmm.
No. I just described Philando Castile.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I just described. Okay. I described the murder of Philando Castile in the same exact city where Alex Petti was murdered. All right. Now let's go back. To 1968, when the very first open carry gun laws were ever put into place that said you can no longer open carry in the state of California. Why did that happen? Because the Black Panthers showed up to the Capitol in California open carrying. The history of gun control in this country has always been one of white supremacy, right? Philando Castile was legally carrying. Philando Castile was approached by the officer while not committing a crime. Philando Castile complied with the officer, and Philando Castile was murdered. For all the people across this country that are in shock and awe at what ICE is doing, need to realize that they're doing what we've always allowed police to do to the black and brown community. And maybe had we just fucking listened at any point during the last 50, 60, 70, 80 years when this police brutality was happening across the country, we wouldn't be here right now. So when I hear Donald Trump now talk about gun control, I'm in the least bit shocked. I'm in the least bit fazed by it, because that's always been the policy of gun control. People that I approve can have guns, and people I don't approve cannot. That's been the reality in America forever. We talk about the Second Amendment as if it applies to everybody. No, it doesn't. The black and brown community has always been suppressed in having guns. Make everybody a felon, then say felons can't have guns. Well, black people are disproportionately made to be felons. Same thing with voting, right? So gun rights and gun laws in this country have always applied to those who fit the mold of white supremacy. And right now we're in late stage white supremacy, where white people are now feeling the effects of the white supremacy they ignored their whole lives. And just like Malcolm X said, the chickens have come home to roost. So listen to him say now that you shouldn't have a gun. That was always the policy of white supremacy. If you're not on my fucking side, you don't get a gun.
Woo, he went hard. But let's make it make sense, Emil. Can you hear me? You like you froze on your side.
No, I'm making sure. I am very, very thankful that Jolly Good Ginger said what he said.
Okay, I just want to make, I was going to like you were froze for a second, so I'll just make sure you're still with me. So how does he calls it late stage white supremacy? Because I think he's correct about the history. I don't think he's correct. The truth is just what it is. He's correct about the history of how, in a sense, the Second Amendment has been used against those who the country deemed are not worthy of having guns. Like he said, the Black Panther shows up with the law opening carry is okay on the Capitol, and now California has stringent gun laws, all because the Black Panther stood up, right? So that is the reality. But let's get into him highlighting late stage white supremacy, because how could or would that apply? I can see how someone might say, well, how does that even apply? Alex Petti, if I'm saying his name correctly.
Petti, Pretti.
So how does Jolly Ginger somehow relate that to white supremacy based on his thoughts? And Alex Petti is white. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the problem, challenge, the thing that he's articulating very clearly is that for the longest time, when so-called white people in America aligned with Black people or brown people or people who were so-called minorities, they were subject to the same treatment as those minorities. So you saw in 1964, 1965, during the Civil Rights era, that white kids were being killed because they were aligned with and supporting Black voting rights. They were aligned with and supporting Black people's right to be treated as equally under the law as citizens. Those white people surrendered their privilege implicitly by aligning with those causes. So when Alex Petti showed up and was aligning with the cause of the suppressed, he became a target in the same sense that those who were already oppressed or those who were already considered minorities were now being treated. So you lose your privilege, you lose that protection. And that's what he's talking about. It's what Jolly Good Ginger's talking about, in my opinion, is that you lose that protection when you align with those forces. The funny part is that so many of the protesters are protesting only the rule of law. They just want the law to be followed. So when Alex Petti was out there with his camera, yes, it was a phone, and he was filming, and he was like this as he was filming, he was aligning with or aligning against what Jolly Good Ginger calls white supremacy or the entrenched power structure. The entrenched power structure saw that as a violation of a implicit rule set, and that implicit rule set being violated allowed for violence to happen. Now, you set the stage for that violence when you give immunity to ICE. You say, we're not going to investigate or prosecute these deaths. And we have at least 9 deaths of people from ICE in 2026 that have not been properly investigated or fully looked at because that implicit immunity. So that late stage white supremacy is now turning against itself. It's turning against the people it's supposed to say are important, which is why he said chickens are coming home to roost, because now the people who ignored that system, who ignored that way of life, are finding out that they are surrendering their privilege when they align with or align against what is considered the entrenched power structure. So there's a lot going on in what he said, but it certainly reflects accurately. And just one last point. The history of the Second Amendment is not about fighting against the British. Let's be very clear that the history of the Second Amendment is specifically to suppress a insurrection from the enslaved Africans who were in this land before and after the signing of the Constitution. That's what the Second Amendment was for. That is why the Second Amendment exists, to make sure that if there was a rebellion or an insurrection from the enslaved people here in this land, that there would be a militia that could put that down immediately.
Hey, and that's why I hate not having both sides to the table, right? It's just, again, Shelly's a big time here, got pulled to a business meeting, because I would love to have that dialogue, because I would offer that we've never been honest about what I shouldn't say never, technically take it back, but we are not currently, political narratives are set to where we can't or we won't be honest about what things really are. Like you said, it's not about, not even the British, like the way we term it now, the current narrative around the Second Amendment. And for those who are big time, and I'm a country boy from South Carolina. I love my guns. So let me say that first before I even just highlight this reality, because somebody will hear me state a fact and think I'm against guns, right? Like, I'm a country boy from South Carolina. I've been shooting since I was a kid, right? So I feel like to say that it doesn't change the fact that the narrative around the citizens having guns, and we do have more guns as citizens than any other country. Like I know I've looked at the numbers. It's crazy. We have more guns than people.
Yes.
In the country, just to kind of say that, right? So we have more guns. I love my guns. However, the narrative that us as the people keeping guns so that our government won't turn the army against us, it keeps the government back, is the current narrative. It's complete BS. But it's the narrative used to cover up the history that you just laid out in this cut that I'm about to play by Kara Anderson. Lays it out for people who may have never heard it. Let's go further and deeper into the reality for why the Second Amendment has a historical racist.
Can you go back in time to the founding fathers, as they say, and talk about where the Second Amendment came from? Teach.
Thank you. This emerged out of the fear of Black people from slavery, that there was this massive fear about these slave revolts, Black people demanding their freedom, being willing to have an uprising to gain their freedom. And what that meant then was that you had this language of, we've got to keep this ferocious monster in chains. And you saw with each revolt, with each uprising, a series of statutes being put in place to say that African American, that the enslaved, that Black people could not own weapons, that they could not have access to weapons. And you also saw the rise and the structure of slave patrols and militias that were there and designed to contain that Black population.
Take us on this journey that led to this book.
Yes, and so it was the killing of Philando Castile. I start off the book going, it was like a snuff film, because we all saw that video image, and it was horrific. It was jarring. And to then get the backstory that this was a man who followed NRA guidelines, letting the officer know that I have a licensed carry weapon with me. You have asked for my ID. I am reaching for my ID. And the officer begins to shoot. So he is killed because he has a weapon. Not that he is brandishing the weapon, not that he is threatening anyone. He simply has a weapon. And that really led me to begin on this journey, as I saw the NRA's virtual silence on this journey to figure out, do African Americans have Second Amendment rights? We're in this moment where the Second Amendment is like hallowed ground. It is sacred. It is one of those things that has been defined as the bedrock of citizenship. And so I started looking. And as I went on this journey, what I saw was that it wasn't about guns. It was about the fear of Black people, It was about the fear of Blackness. It was about the societal labeling of Black people as dangerous, as a threat to whites, and that this architecture comes in place in order to contain this Black population, in order to provide security and safety to the white community from this fear of Black people. And then you get this really weird matrix happening where Black people are feared but needed. And so it is how do we contain them? How do we snuff out their quest for freedom? How do we snuff out their quest for their basic human rights, while also keeping them as labor without rights? How do we do that? How do we make that subjugation happen? How do we talk about, in this land of the United States of America, how do we talk about freedom, but try to keep it contained from this Black population? We don't want them getting the ether that we're talking about in this revolutionary moment about freedom and democracy and justice. We don't want them hearing the words about equality. How do we do that?
All facts.
Facts.
And so the narrative that it's so that our government won't turn this tyranny on us. Now, I saw one comment that was correct, talking about, for example, the English over in England, the crown would try to ensure that the peasantry or the proletariat. Am I saying it right, Emil? But you try to make
both
sure
of them are correct, but you can you can call it the peasants or the serfs.
Yeah. So they would ensure that they not have guns. And so there is that history, that long history with the English settling the Americas does exist. But the reality for why the Second Amendment was most put in place, it's for what she talked about. And in addition, because when I think about the beginning of the country, it was also for manifest destiny. It was that, like, Kara Anderson didn't touch on that, but that's some additional history that I looked at. So it was two things. To, in a sense, control these enslaved Africans, as well as continue to defend and fight the Native Americans. And so when we know that that original Constitution and those original words, we understand it was for white landowners. It was also these rules for white landowners to have their guns to be able to push down anything that happened, like any rebellions with the enslaved Africans, or to be able to defend or go take over or conquer the Native Americans. So those words were written specifically for those white landowners at that time. And now the beauty is, throughout the years, and then us as African Americans, we fought to make those words true for more than just us. That's where we're at in 2026. But that history gets hidden on purpose. And that's why, for us, we were not surprised to see how MAGA's response has been. And this is calling it what it is, has been to this, because we watched it happen with the Black Panthers, as Jolly Ginger pointed out. We've seen this happen consistent. And with that said, it's not what you say you are, as Eddie Glaude always say, you are what you do. And this is what we do every time. And so I saw another cut, I'm not going to play it, where a sister was kind of breaking down, hey, for African Americans, it's like, okay, yeah, we told you so, but it's not a told you so we're gloating in. It's a told you so and saying, hey, this is what it's been like in our community throughout. What's happened to Alex Petti is not new for us, but it's not that we're glad to see it. It's, here's the reality. What are we going to do about it? Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, so this is the challenge that we see when we kind of unpack the propaganda around all of this stuff, because the Second Amendment is supposed to apply universally. And if you are, there's been lots of gun control laws at the federal and state level. Those laws are being challenged consistently. There's a big case coming out of Hawaii that's going to challenge gun law there, because they're doing all they can to say that the Second Amendment should be an unrestricted right to own firearms. That has always been selectively enforced. And that's the part that people don't understand. the Second Amendment applies universally, but it's enforced selectively. When is it enforced? And that's where you see in history that the enforcement of the Second Amendment always tends to favor holding a certain group in power more than another group, or preventing another group from expressing its constitutional right to bear arms as needed, i.e. the Black Panthers open carry in California. As we see this unfold, you're going to see a new round of gun laws coming out of this administration to say that perhaps what other people have said for years, that this is not necessarily an unrestricted right to carry firearms. Now, all of a sudden, it's going to be a restricted right, and this administration may be the one that says it. Now, what you're also seeing is that the NRA very clearly made a statement saying that Alex Petti was in the right. He was carrying legally. He did nothing wrong in the videos that everyone watched. So for him to have been attacked, assaulted, and murdered, and then having the NRA say, wait a second, that doesn't look right to us as the nation's voice of the Second Amendment. Perhaps there's something that is becoming a bit of a reckoning, because now you're seeing the administration upsetting its base through the Second Amendment. And that's something that people are going to have to watch, because there's going to be a lot more propaganda going back and forth between the two as to whether or not the Second Amendment is an unrestricted right that is not selectively enforced, or if there's going to be some new gun control laws that are going to come out and change that unrestricted right for everyone.
Yeah, we've always had ridiculous conversations around gun control, and the ridiculous conversations from a political narrative are just the extremes of it. There are sensible things that can be done. That doesn't mean take away our guns per se. And again, I don't want anyone to take my guns. And so there are sensible conversations, and it's unfortunately, it's kind of funny to see that this is the situation that's going to require some of the things you're talking about. That nuance may finally come out to play, but we're not surprised the NRA never had anything to say about Philando Castile, and now they're quote unquote forced to say something about Alex Petti. But I will say again, to our community, I never concern myself with that stuff. I never concern myself, nor do I expect the NRA to say something when Philando Castile gets killed. I don't expect anything or whatever. I'm not surprised to see that they finally say something about Alex Petti, in a sense, as they've been forced to say something. Like, I'll never be the Black person that goes on media and says, hey, where's the NRA? I watch what you do. I've watched what you've done.
Right. Their track record is very clear. We don't have to wonder where they stand. And that's the challenge that I think a lot of people are going to have to see throughout this time, as we're being told by the administration, don't believe what you see from multiple angles and multiple cameras, including the cameras that are on our officers. Like, you're going to see this propaganda come out, and that propaganda is going to be used as fodder for how they've shaped these next round of gun laws. And quite frankly, this is going to come to a very significant legal, if not legislative, if not kinetic loggerhead, where somebody somewhere is going to really push back on this administration saying, hold up, you're telling us to ignore what's obvious in our own, to our own eyes. But more importantly, you're using that to oppress us in a way that we certainly cannot stand. I'm waiting for the don't tread on me folks and the people who really care about the Second Amendment, who have said all these years to all these other gun control laws, no. I'm ready to see how they react when the administration they supported begins to do the same things that they said they didn't want.
Well, I'll be shocked to see that happen, because again, I go by what you do. So your hope and expectations are higher than mine. And again, I love my gun. So that's just me, personally, as far as when it comes to me personally. But yeah, if you're right about what you see coming, I respect it. Again, you are the political expert here. But speaking of being right, I'll say this after this cut. As I said, we're going to do a shorter show since we don't have both sides to the table. We don't have Brother Shelley. I'm going to play a cut from Shelley that kind of something else that just recently happened when it comes to being politically conscious. I thought this was a very interesting take from Shelley on his actual show. So this will be our last cut. We'll do a 30-minute show today and keep it moving. And hopefully we'll get Shelley back next week so we can do these conversations the way we need to do them, which is from both sides of the table, so that we are being fair and making sure we're weeding through the propaganda from both perspectives and not just one side of it. All right, let's play this cut from Shelley.
These are the kinds of things that you do unnecessarily. First of all,
real quick. This is you probably shot this, Emil. This is Shelley addressing the exhibits being moved from the President Washington's house. So I did give that context so people know what he's leading into. I forgot to give the context. All right, y'all. So this is in reference to those exhibits being removed, just so everybody has the context of what he's talking about.
These are the kinds of things that you do unnecessarily. First of all, these 9 people were owned by George Washington and lived in this house. They were cooks, they were maids, they were owned by him. Why wouldn't you tell that story? It's not a bad story. Doesn't make George Washington's a man of his time. He's the first president of the United States. He owned slaves. We know there's no secret. Many of the men at that time owned slaves. It was a thing. It's part of our history. It is nothing to be ashamed about. Actually, it's to be celebrated because we went from that to here is the celebration. That is the celebration. So you don't get rid of it. So now, my Democrat friends say, see, Shelley? I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that at all. But here's the bigger picture, my friends. Every single Republican, conservative, Trump supporter, after the election, myself included, said the exact same thing. Donald Trump got a record number of black voters, particularly black men. Remember, I said it. 23% of black men voted for Trump. Yeah, we're getting black voters now. What happens now? The bigger picture. Not this one story, but the bigger picture. You think they come back? I've been saying this from the beginning. These are not Republican voters. These are Trump voters. There was a coalition built with Hispanics, African Americans, conservatives. My friends on conservative radio talk about it all the time. Here's the bigger picture. The bigger picture. That was the big picture. Now's the bigger picture. Those people were not Republican voters. They're Trump voters. And so doing things like this, these little things that Democrats make bigger, and they're important to me. This is history. I don't believe in this. But here's what happens. You're throwing away the coalition that you built. You're tossing, we got a record number of black voters. Oh, well, let's take down the slavery exhibit at the president's house in Philadelphia. Why? We don't need the black voters anymore. But the Republican Party does. So where are the Republicans on this story? This is the bigger picture. Where are my Republican senators? Where are my Republican congresspeople? Where are my Georgians here in Georgia on this story to say, hey, whoa, National Park Service, maybe you shouldn't do that. If for no other reason to say, I need those black voters in my election. You see, here's the thing. When you talk about African American voters, particularly me, I'll speak for me. I can't speak for all of them. Here's the thing. We didn't leave one plantation called the Democrat Party to come to another one and be disrespected. So if you do want to go down these roads, I'm happy to allow you to. And if you as Republican candidates, you as Republican congressmen running for re-election who brag about Trump getting 23% of the black male vote and a record number of black voters, if you brag about that, but you're not willing to stand up and say, whoa, put the exhibit back, Mr. President. If you're too scared to do that, I don't need you. And I certainly don't want you bragging on the amount of black voters you got in 2024. I'm not going to be used. I didn't want to be used by the Democrats. I most certainly don't want to be used by the Republicans.
I told you for this week, Amit, that Shelley's holding his side accountable, if you will, right?
Yep.
And so that's an example of that. You've always said that he would do that. And so that's an example of him saying, hey, man, you're using us. I wish he was here, because the one thing I would challenge him from a propaganda standpoint is the Democrat plantation to another one. Like, we shouldn't even play around with the word plantation when it comes
Amen
to it, because it's being used in a propagandized narrative in a way that just tries to say you're stupid for being on your side. Like, that's what it equates to. And so I'm not and then outside of the historical context in itself, just for us as African Americans, I mean, that in itself is enough of a reason to not use it, right? The historical context of what that means to us as African Americans. But it's also a way where we talk about having dialogue and our republic working with the dissent that should be a part of it, that makes us healthy.
Yes.
That's an unhealthy form of that dissent, to buy into that propaganda, to say either side is a plantation. For anybody out there watching, it's not me telling you should be, I'm an independent, so I'm not telling you to be on one side, but that type of terminology actually pushes you towards non-participation, versus we're always advocating on politically conscious that you do learn locally what's happening, so that you don't buy into the propaganda of what did the president do for you. I don't want to waste no time on that, but I can tell you exactly what different laws have happened locally that I've had to go and vote for, won some, lost some, that affect me directly in my district. That's the type of consciousness that I'm talking about. I kind of went on a little diatribe just because he used the word plantation.
Right.
Let you circle back to what he's talking about when it comes to those exhibits. I respect Shelley saying, hey, you're going too far. If he was here, I would also say, man, we've been telling you this, because you said, I don't like hearing that. So I wonder if he would open up to the fact that we've been seeing this, what's happening, and there's been several steps. It took this for Shelley to get to this point, but there's other examples of President Trump doing this type of thing, or this administration doing this type of thing. So I would love to challenge him with that, but he's not here for that. Go ahead, Emil.
Sure. I mean, changing how the National Museum of African American History and Culture is run was a primary example. And that was almost a year ago that he did that. So we have plenty of evidence that this administration is hostile to Black history in the way that we understand it. And we're not equivocating on that. I'm glad Shelley came around. But here's the thing that I think we're really sort of underselling in this context. Anytime you change history the way you're seeing it change, you're trying to change the official record of grievances and how those grievances are to be addressed and repaired. That is the fundamental thing that I'm seeing when I unpack these actions. It isn't just, he's, trying to elevate President Washington. We've lionized President Washington 1,000 ways in this country. There's a whole state named after him. There are tons and tons of ways we lionize George Washington. The fact that he owned slaves and was a horrific slave holder on top of that, because one of his escaped slaves, he had a grudge for years. He would not let that go. So we can lionize George Washington as the first president, as one of the founders of the nation, and still hold him to account for being a man of his times. You know who else were men of their times? 1/3 of all the signers of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution were also men of their times, and they were abolitionists. Abolitionists were men of their time just as much as slaveholders were. So that argument is moot, in my opinion. What is true, however, is that what Shelley said, that it's just true. He was that man. He was one of many who did that thing. So to deny that is to change not only history, but the context of history, which is what we need to preserve as long as possible. Because when we do that, when we remove the context of history, everything begins to stand in its own vacuum. And we don't want that. We want the thread of history. And this is what I love what Shelley said here, is that the thread of history is we went from a president who held slaves to a nation that outlawed it. That is worthy of context, of celebration, of understanding that we went from this to that. It took time, it took blood, it took a lot of pain, but we got there. As a nation, we need to remember that and celebrate it. Otherwise, there's no progress. America just showed up in 2026 as is. The last thing I'll say about what he said that I think is really important is that we take a look at the coalition that Trump built. Did they vote down ballot Republican? No, they split their votes. There was a lot of Black folks who voted for the Republican Trump, but voted for in their local elections. They didn't vote necessarily as strong for their down ballot election as they did for Trump. That is an important aspect that Shelley articulated when he said it's the Republican Party that needs them, not just Trump. And the problem is that the Republicans have not done their part to continue to woo and support those Black voters who voted for Trump. In other words, those non-down ballot voters aren't changing their votes down ballot when it comes time to vote in 2028 or 2026. And that is the problem with these movements that he articulated. You're not seeing an effort to recruit, retain, and woo Black voters throughout the Republican Party by their policies and the stances they're taking during these very difficult times. So he's 100% correct that they were Trump voters. The Republican Party has lost its way trying to figure out how to retain those voters and then have them motivate them to vote down ballot.
Yeah, I hear you. And this is kind of what Shelley was saying in that cut. I'm going to say this and get us out of here. That sounds silly to me. And I'm going to tell you why. I wish Shelley was here for me to say that to him. And of course, he would have his response. And I'm not saying I'm right. But why it sounds silly to me is because the president himself has, in a sense, endorsed these things. And so, in a sense, when I think about the logic that you're using, that in a sense, they were not Republican voters. Some of these people were Trump voters, right? They were Trump voters in particular. So to me, it sounds crazy as hell to me that the Republicans, who haven't ever really catered to some of these voters that they brag about that Trump got and kind of take claim, as Shelley said, but it sounds crazy to me that a group that has never catered to would now somehow know how to overcome Trump, who himself, to a degree, is the one alienating him. He's alienating this so-called coalition. I don't know. I'm just saying. So I don't like. I hear Shelley challenging his Republican friends to say, "Hey, well, stand up to Trump on this." I'm like, well, he brought him in. Now he's alienating them. How are you going to ask them who've never catered to them? They still don't know how to cater. I'm just saying, I think he's correct in his analysis of that some of that coalition was built specifically by Trump. But Trump himself is the one basically shitting on it. So in that sense, How do the Republicans who've never catered to these groups that he brought in, how do you challenge this? I'm not saying, for him, he wants to figure it out because he's a MAGA Republican, right? Like Shelley is. So I get that he wants to figure out, well, how do we keep this coalition going? But the way that he's challenging them logically makes no sense to me. Like he should be saying, hey, Republicans, we should figure out a way to, maybe he's saying standing up to Trump would be the way to show that. But I would be shocked if that's going to hold any type of coalition. And I don't think
it holds water. I think it was an anomaly. And I think it was an anomaly that what you saw with the Trump vote in 2024. And I also think, to your point, and this is the part I think as we kind of look at all the propaganda around that coalition, that you're not seeing policies that consistently give people who voted for him in 2024 confidence that a 2026 vote for the Republicans or 2028 vote for the Republicans is going to significantly improve their lives. I don't even think necessarily that it was Trump as much as a lot of it was an anti-vote versus a for vote. It was like, I'm not voting for her, I'm voting for not her. And and I think there's a lot of that that gets conflated with they voted for Trump. No, they voted against something that they thought was bad versus they voted for Trump. In other words, I don't know what Trump would do that could hold them other than run against her again, run against Kamala again. Those are the kind of things that I really think need to be analyzed more deeply in order for the Republicans to say, hey, we have this coalition, we can recruit retain and woo and cater to and all the things necessary to make that voter group become part of its base. I don't think they've done that. I don't think they're going to do that. And to your point, I don't think they recognize that the guy they say brought them to the party is now sending them home from the party just as easily, because he's wedded to something that never was part of the agenda for which people voted in the first place.
No, absolutely. And let me say this, just to weed through some of the propaganda. Another thing, again, I hate that Shelley's not here, but it's the first time in a long time that I heard him say, got 22% of the African male vote. Shelley been creeping that thing up to 25% for about 2 years straight. And I always mess with it because it's actually 21%. So I'm being a numbers guy, I was just proud to watch him say 22%. I'm like, oh, look at him backing it down in this context, because he's always been creeping it up higher than it was. And the reality was he got a 19% the first time. So it was a small uptick. I'm just calling it what it is. It's not me downplaying it. It's calling the numbers are what they were. They were 19% his first election for African-American males, 21% this time based on the exit polls. The reason I highlight that is because the big number was the Hispanic vote. The Hispanic males literally jumped up to about 50%. And the stuff that we're talking about today and how ICE has played out above and beyond the criminals, he has now lost. That's the coalition that he's lost. Those black males probably will not be. I mean, those Hispanic males that switched, because they literally switched. I'm talking about from the first election to the next election. That was his biggest jump. Again, us going up 2% is going up, but it's not a big jump. But for Hispanic males, they jumped up almost 50%. So he's lost that. And it's just calling it what it is. And again, it's not even me being for or against. I just like to call the numbers what they are. All right, that's all I got, man. Thank you for the additional time. We'll have a longer show next week. Hopefully we'll get Shelley back. We'll have a get pulled away. And that's what we're here for, man. Just trying to weed through the propaganda. Closes out, Emil. Thank you for taking the time with me, brother.
This is a challenge to all of our viewers, and that is every time you see this narrative from the administration, from sources, and you have the opportunity to see it for yourself, as hard as it is, look. As hard as it is, recognize that the facts are being captured in real time, and that the narrative from any voice, when you have the facts in front of you, that narrative needs to be challenged with your own assessment and understanding. Do not let these people, all of them, whether they're in the press or in the administration, tell you what your eyes can see. Now, I'm not a big fan of eyewitness accounts, but when the video camera's running, it's hard to say that ain't true. And most of the video that we're seeing now is in context. It's long form. It's not 12 seconds, 10 seconds. It's minutes and minutes long. Right. So watch the entire video before you hear anything from any side, because we need more of us watching the raw footage and making an assessment for ourselves.
Hey, episode 59. We'll be back next week with episode 60. Thank you, Emil. If you're tired of the propaganda, listen to us. Good stuff. Thank you, brother.
Yes, sir.